Welcome to my talk, PHP Pretty Horrible Programs. Normally I do a bit of a talk about the foundation, but because Roman was here at the keynote yesterday, I'll change it up a bit. I'm just going to show some stats for 2024. So about I have some Git stats about the main people that have been committing to the project. If you can see, there's 800 commits. I somehow got near 600 commits last year. I don't know how. But there's quite a bit of activity. But obviously, code contribution and commits is not the only metric that we use, because writing code is not actually the best, the only thing we do. So I got some other statistics that I got using Graphite, which is this tool to do stacked-based merge workflow, but which we don't really use. But one really neat thing that it has is that it gives you a bunch of statistics from your repo, and how many PRs were merged, the total lines of code modified, the net change, how many PRs were reviewed, unique authors, and unique reviewers. Now, how GitHub counts reviews and how it's exposed by the API is a bit wonky. So it's not the most accurate. Sometimes it overinflates the amount. Sometimes it completely reduces them. So just for my own personal statistics, I spend so much time reviewing code. I've reviewed 700 PRs last year, and I've merged 104 of my own. And then also doc stuff, also a lot of activities, especially when a new release comes out, especially for 8.4, there's a lot of changes that need to go through. And outside of a lot of PRs are also typos, or small sentence structures. But yeah, so a lot of code activities, a lot of new lines, so many reviews as well on the whole project. And yeah, also personal stats, I have reviewed 852 doc PRs. Now some of them are just, okay, it's a typo approved merge, but some are documenting the new DOM extension or doing the migration guide and all of this stuff. So now with this done and explaining also what a lot of the job of the foundation is, which is reviewing code so that other people can contribute to the project, let's see some oddities PHP does sometimes. So just before I start, I have 3 versions of PHP installed on my machine. So I have PHP 8.3 by default. I have PHP 8.2 as well, just on the machine, and I have PHP 8.4. So sometimes I will show different ways the code runs in different versions. Okay, let's start actually. So also, can you see everything, or do you want me to zoom the thing? Cool, brilliant. Worst case, if you're in the back, move forward. So PHP, I mean, this is classical, an empty string with is considered to be false. So if I just run this, PHP, what is my 10? Yes, okay, 1, cool, brilliant. Space, you get the I am falsy, very normal. So now this is a bit of a quite known oddity in PHP, but many programming languages do not actually consider the string 0 to be false, but PHP does. This is, I feel quite well known, and that people always have this thing where the 0 is the false string, although it's not empty, and this is very confusing for people that come from other programming languages. Now, in general, objects are evaluated to true, because obviously you have an object, I have an instance of something, I don't have nothing. Now, some extensions, and PHP allows extensions to override the behavior of a Boolean cast. So in this same regard, simple XML, so currently it's just loading an empty root element, and if you try to evaluate this object, it will tell you it's false. So this is something to be slightly aware, is that objects in PHP can, well, from internal extensions, can overload their casting behavior. Now, GMP is this I mean, if you saw Sarah's talk, you would know what it is. But for those who haven't, it's arbitrary integer precision math, which allows you to add very large integers. Now, as we saw, 0 is considered to be false, and we have seen that objects can modify the casting behavior. So I'll just do a bit of a wild guess. You can raise your hand. What do you think this code will run, considering that it's an integer which is 0? Anybody wants to guess true? Few people. Anybody wants to guess false? Few other people. Yeah, you're both wrong. So this actually got fixed in 8.4. So if I run this in 8.4, this will actually now be false, as it will mimic the behavior of an integer. But prior to this, basically the GMP object did not support the Boolean cast. And so would just tell you like this weird, irrecoverable fatal error, which you might be familiar with if you still have a bunch of PHP 5 code laying around, because before the engine started emitting errors, it would used to do this, and then you could catch them via an error handler and then tell like it's fine and go back to the execution context. But we basically migrated all of these to a normal error, except this one. And it's a bit tricky because a lot of assumptions, like a lot of the code base assumes that getting a Boolean, like trying to get a Boolean from a value just works fine and you never get an exception. I tried to fix this initially for 8.0, but that got very hard very quickly. So I might try again. Okay, let's move on. So PHP comparisons. So we'll start with this, in that PHP has this weird non-notion of how you determine that two objects or two values are not comparable between each other. In that, if you try to determine them to be, so it will basically always tell you that left is greater than right. So if I change op1 to be op2, and op2 to be op1, and I run this again, I get the same behavior. And this is basically PHP's way of telling you, I don't know what you're doing here, give me something sensible, just go hell. So yeah, that's like, if you get into this behavior, what is your code doing? But yeah, that's PHP's like way of deciding how to do stuff. PHP also has this like thing where like normally when you're trying to do comparisons between different values, you would expect it to just work. But if you try to, or tell you that it's not comparable for some reason, right? But if you try to compare an integer to an object, you get a notice. Not even a warning, you just get a notice telling you that like, yeah, I can't cast my object to an integer, which is like, duh, obviously. So yeah, and then yeah, I think it casts, I think, the object to 1. I think it like does like, oh, is it true? And then it does 1. I don't remember the exact behavior of this. So let's go. I mean, as well, other stuff with many things that internal objects can do is that internals can overload the comparison operators. So you can actually compare objects to each other. Oh, I forgot to put like the PHP at the beginning. Obviously, autocomplete is not going to work. This usually happens every time I do this talk, so bear with me. And that, yeah, like you can compare like an object. You can say that like, well, I want, well, April 16th from last year, or May 24th of last year is obviously the same. But however, if I change the order here from op2 to like op1, and I run it again, I get that left is greater than right, rather than left is less than right. Which means that you can actually just have two date objects and compare them rather than doing like, I think there's a method for that. Is Derek here? No, he's not. Oh well, he can't tell me if I'm wrong or if there is actually a method for that. Okay, string comparisons. Who has an idea how string comparisons work in PHP? Oh, 0 hands. Wow, you're in for a treat, people. So PHP has this thing where you can do comparisons between like like can compare them by order and have them ordering, and how it does, it basically does like an ASCII check. It like looks that, okay, A is less than A, B is the same as B, okay, C is like less than G compared to an ASCII code point, and so that's how it does the comparisons. Now, PHP also can do some very funky things, is that if you have two numeric strings, it actually compares them as the integers or as floats. So yeah, the string 007 is equal to the string 7, which is very sensible. Well, it depends on what you want to do. If it comes from HTTP, which is I think the main reason is that like HTTP, everything is a string, and if you get data, then comparing them as string is fine, I guess, but it can be quite surprising. Now, clearly, this doesn't look like at all like a number, so you wouldn't expect anything to happen with this. However, this will also tell you that it's equal, because PHP has this notion of exponential notation in strings. So the string 0e9 is actually interpreted as the like 0 times 10 to the power 9, which is obviously equal to 0 times 10 to the power 3, because it's just 0 equals 0. So string 4. Now, this one is extremely cursed, and I hate it. And Nikita, like, I dug this up from like an RFC that like Nikita wrote like a while ago. But currently, so there are two things which are going on, and that you have a string which is being cast and interpreted as a float. No, the float is cast to a string. I think the behavior changed at one point. So the float is cast to a string, and it does the like numeric semantics. But then you have this precision ini setting, which tells you how many decimals you can store and use in a float representation. So if I change this to 0 and run this again, I get that left is less than right. Because 17.555, when you've reduced the precision to 0, becomes 18. And then when you cast this to a string, well, you get that like, obviously 1 is the same, but then when you get 7 is less than 8. So like you have like that operand left is less than right. I don't know why you will ever use the precision ini setting. You probably should never even use it and just like leave the default on. And I don't know why it exists in the first place, but it does. And you can do just like nonsense like this. Okay, slightly moving on. Let me just clear up my IDE quickly. And oh, I forgot I had so many examples. Wow. Whoop, whoop. This clear? So this I'll just go quickly, because this I thought I was going to get around to possibly improving this, but other stuff prevailed. So I think most of you might be familiar with like the function array intersect. So what array intersect is, oh, I haven't even updated the example since like 3 months ago. Well, I guess you're now in the UK. But when you do array intersects, it takes you the common elements within both arrays. And so, well, hello, the string hello exists in both. And so you get the intersection of it, which is just the string hello. And this, now the way it does the comparison is slightly strange. Okay, if I know how to type, that would help. In that it actually typecasts the value to strings. So it casts the integer 7 to the string 7, and then it, well, okay, these two strings are the same. Which, you know, compared to the previous type juggling, I guess you can be, okay, PHP does type juggling, this is all fine. This, like, makes sense. Now, if anybody knows something about PHP and how arrays work, and like when you try to use them as strings, is that you will get a warning and they are capitalized to array. So if I try to do array intersect on an array which contains another array, I basically get two massive warnings, and then it tells me, it's like, yeah, the intersection of both arrays is actually, I give you the first one. Because how it does the comparison is that it casts the array to a string, which is the string array with a capital A, it does this with the other variable, which is obviously equal, and then it tells you that these two like sub-arrays exist in both arrays. This is a bit bonkers. It does emit a warning, so I guess it will be fixed by PHP 9 anyway, but it would be kind of sensible for just array intersects to work the correct way by default. Oh, I'm glad I got Sarah. Cool, that's good, that's good. Now, in the same gist in that, well, we can have arrays, and you would imagine that like array intersect might just always work because you're just doing a comparison. But as you might know, std class does not support a stringable interface. And then when you try to actually run array intersect, you get a fatal error because you get uncalled error in that like I couldn't convert my class std class to a string. And you would be like, where am I actually doing a string comparison here? I am just trying to check that my arrays have like some common elements. But yeah, that's because of how string casting goes. And this is just a fun one, like a last one, is that like you can just basically mimic and get like weird cases if you know how resources are cast to string, in that you can just be like, well, I have my stdr object, and then I have my other object which has like resource id string 3, and because the resource get cast to a string by its own, no warning though, this just works without a warning, and it just tells you, yeah, these is obviously the same, like I have the resource. And you would imagine that it takes you the second array. No, it's just that when printf or like print r is doing the passing, it's actually the original stdr. Okay, cool. Oh, okay, this is one of my favorite topics we're going on next, so I hope you'll enjoy this. So increments, obviously everybody knows like the plus plus and minus minus increment. Like operators in that you can do like something something plus plus and something something minus minus, and then it will like give you plus 1, minus 1. So, boom. Now, if you try to do, if you would have false, so, well, I guess we'll just run it. So this is new, in that since 8.3, you get a warning in that you're trying to do an incremental type bool and this does nothing. And this is going to change in the next version of PHP. Mainly because if you do bool equals false, and instead of doing plus plus, I would do plus equal 1, and rerun this again, I would just get 1. So the fact that plus plus is not the same as plus equal 1 is already insanely frustrating. And you're like, why is this even the case in the first place? And so this is the same with minus minus, in that you get like, currently you get like a warning since 8.3, and that you get telling that this will change in the next version. And I am pretty sure this was added in 8.3 because, yeah, if I do 8.2, this just says false. Like the variable, like the Boolean variable just doesn't change. Now, you could expect that like, well, okay, Booleans don't do something, well, null might either not do anything as well, or it might actually get incremented and like function like numbers. But when you actually run this, I will also run this on 8.2, and you run this, well, if you try to increment null, you get 1. If you try to decrement null, you get null. Because having asymmetry between your plus plus and your minus minus operators is the best thing ever and very consistent with the language. Same as before, like since 8.3, you now get a warning that decrement on null has no effect, and that this will change the next major version to like mimic how minus equal 1 would behave. Okay, strings, brilliant. So similar to null, the empty string has also very obvious behavior in that if you increment the empty string, you get the string 1, but if you decrement the empty string, you get the integer minus 1. Because everything is normal. Just everything makes sense in this language. Just everything's consistent. Like, well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know about this because okay. I don't know. Well, yeah, cleat is indeed not a command that I have on this computer. Um, so JavaScript does not have this feature, but Perl does have this feature, and this is why we call this feature the Perl increment. And that if you have a string, like a string ZZ, like a string, and you increment it, it does like how Excel column tables work. So ZZ, and the next column is like AAA, and it does this stuff. But the implementation of this is quite buggy. So if you have a leading space and you run it, it actually doesn't do anything to the string. It just sees like, well, there was no letters here. I see nothing here. But if you have a leading string, it's also broken because it somehow loses the carry. So if you just want to do integer, like arithmetic modulo 26, I guess you can just do this with like a leading space and just cycle through all of the variables. Or you could just use like the modulo operator, which would be sensible. So yeah, now, okay, we've had like strings coming to like strings being incremented being strings, and that's all fine and that's all good, but like surely if I increment a string like 100 times, I get a string again, which you don't. You get the float 50, which the reason this happens is during this loop, you get at this following step, which is 5d9. And so if you remember what happened with exponential notation just before, you might have a bit of a guess, but like what happens is that you get 5d9, then you get 5e0, and then what PHP does is just like, oh, I know what 5e0 is. That's a string in exponential notation. So let me just cast this to a float and do +1 to it. So then you get 6. That's how you get type juggling in the most random way possible. I might have spent a lot of time on this. This is not just yet deprecated. The reason why is that in 8.3 we added the str increment, and also to make it equivalent, the str decrement function to PHP. And the objective is, well, I hope, is to actually deprecate this string increment behavior in 8.5, if people will let me do this. So that in PHP 9, basically, yeah, like plus plus and minus minus just becomes plus equal 1 and minus equal 1. And that's just consistent across the language. So yeah, cool. Okay. Range, I might not do all of it, especially as like, I don't know how much. Oh, that's fine. I should be fine for time. Range, basic, cool. So, basic 1. So range is a function which you give it an input, like a start point and an end point, and then it gives you an array of integers following the range. Normal, very good, very sensible. Plenty of languages have this, like either via range operator or Python was via the range function. Very normal. You can also dictate like a step, being like, oh, I want to go from 1.26 in increments of 1.5, and then you get a range, which is like 1, 2.5, 4, 5.5, very normal. All of this is very sensible. No. Maybe I will learn how to write the word clear consistently. So 3, you can also go in, like do it in reverse. So like you wanted to go from 1 to 10 in increments of -3. So I think, yeah, now, like in 8.3, this tells you a value error because you're trying to go to 1 to 10 in increments of -3, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But prior to this, in 8.2, it would just work. It would just be like, yeah, you dummy, I know what you mean. You want to go from 10 to 1 in increments of -3. I will just handle this for you. So yeah, that's my minor like sanity check for everybody. So now, who wants to guess what happens if you try to increment, or like try to get a range from 1 to 10 with a step of not a number? Okay, Nobody has an idea, and I'm not sure anybody would, because you get an empty array. Which is very funny, because none of the static analysis tools actually thought you could get an empty array from range. So I initially went to them and like told them, yeah, I'm trying to fix this, but I don't know if you want to report this. And everybody, what they told me is that like, we don't actually track nan as a separate value in like our type system. So this would be very hard to support, but if you're fixing it anyway, we might not bother with it. But also, if you ever have a nan as a step, what the hell are you doing, people? Okay. Now, this is another thing in the same vein as like string increments, in that PHP supports like ranges. Range string 1. So you want to go from A to G, and increments of 2 want to get like A, C, E, G. Okay. Sure, this seems maybe familiar enough to our previous string increments, in that like you go from stuff from A to increment. But you can't really increment in like 1.5 letters. What does this even mean? So PHP, trying to be helpful, runs it and be's like, wow, surely you just meant 0, right, for your strings, if you're trying to go in increments of 1.5. So it would just basically cast your strings to 0, and obviously if you want to go from 0 to 0, then you just want to be 0. This, again, I'm pretty sure it's an 8.3. I got an RFC, yeah. So now you get a warning, and that your step must be of type int when generating an array of characters, and the inputs are converted to 0, and you get your stack trace, so it keeps the old, like the old behavior, but it gives you a warning telling you like, hey, by the way, you have something completely wild happening. String 3. So actually, the range function doesn't work with like normal string characters. It actually works with ASCII code points. So if I want to go from like percentage to hash, well, I get like $ in the middle, because that's how the ASCII table works. And you would imagine, well, if I want to go from the string 1, like my ASCII symbol string character 1, to the ASCII symbol hash, I would get like a ASCII table. But similar as before, okay, wait, I'm pretty sure, because yeah, the behavior changed between 8.2 and 8.3. Then in 8.2, it would be like, okay, I have something with like a 1, so it's a string, so let me convert this to an integer, because I obviously want to work with integers. And then it sees the n being a string, but it says like, well, I thought you were working with integers, so it decides to cast this to a string, to cast the string to an integer, which obviously becomes 0, so you get the range 1, 0. I'm pretty sure, it's been a while since I looked at this, but like now, if your inputs are actually strings, it will, since 8.3, it will act as strings. So you go from 1 to hash, which is like, yeah, all of the ASCII points. I don't know my ASCII timetable, like ASCII timetables. But yeah, so range also does this stuff, which is fancy and nice and useful. Oh boy, array object. Who has heard of array object? Quite a few people. So array object is this class from SPL, which allows you to, as its name implies, to use an object, like use an object as an array. So it implements all of the array access methods by default, and like all of the append operations and everything. So you can just use it, and you get like, I can var dump and I can append, and it just works the way you would expect it to work, except that the person who implemented it decided it would be such a great idea that you could use array object, and instead of having an array as your backing storage, that you can have a class instance as your backing storage. So basically what happens is that when you try to access an offset, why is this wet? Okay, yeah, so this works. Why did autocomplete not work? Oh, okay. is that when you try to just access the variable with like via the offset notation, it gives you access to the property, so that you can use any class, like instance of an object which has properties as simply just access them as an array key, which I guess is useful to a certain degree. Now the problem is that you can do some very weird things with it. In that, for example, if I say that I want just to write to like the variable p2, now if you look at it, p2 says it's an integer. And if I write to it, I get public int p2 string hello, because array object just doesn't care about your types and will just write to it. Like takes a hammer and just be like, yeah, let me just shove it into the slot. Very normal. Now, I could do this the same, like, okay, well, you know, p3, well, it's the same, but if I now do, okay, let's do O, and let's assign something to p3, you know, which is read-only. I will do something like, let's say like 42, because 42 is the answer of life. Why is this complaining? Oh, can't declaration to what? Oh, right. Okay, yeah. See, this happens when you do too much wait cases. You forget how the language actually behaves, and that you can only do it in the constructor. Did I not have it somewhere? Okay. I forgot about this detail. I'm pretty sure this happened last time, but oh well. Let's just do... I can't have a default value either. Okay, well, just trust me on this. You can play with it at home. But if you actually... Well, actually, no, I can do it. I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do, which is basically... Correct answer is that I can just write to it multiple times. Because that's actually what I want to showcase. Which is, yeah, if I run it, every access doesn't, like, every object doesn't actually care about read only. It will just read to it again, doesn't care about types, doesn't care about read only. The plan is to deprecate this behavior. Well, the plan is to deprecate using array object with a backing object, because it just breaks every single possible engine invariance and expectations, and so we need to add so much boilerplate code to not break these assumptions, because, well, somebody could have just decided to use array object to just destroy all of your properties to be sensible. So yeah, back to it. Yeah, we get into, I don't think this example is the most interesting. Let's skip this one. So, yep. Okay, so you can actually have a backing property, like, so, you know, we can add indexes to, like, as an array. And then what PHP does is that, like, well, you're trying to access the offset 3, but it's like 3 doesn't exist, like the property 3 doesn't exist, so let me just write to it. And then it dynamically creates a variable, like a property on your class, which is just called 3, which you can actually access via this notation here. But also, what you might notice is that since PHP 8.1, I think, dynamic properties were deprecated. This is not emitting any deprecation. It just does it. So yeah, I think the rest is like a bit less interesting of this category. Oh, brilliant. We'll get to my some of my other favorite stuff. PHP has some of these declare, like any settings that happen. And one of these is the disable classes any setting. And what it does, it takes a comma-separated value of class names, and then it disables them in some way in the engine. Now, what I find funny is, like, what would happen if I decide to just deprecate, like, just remove the error class and cause a type error by passing an array to strlen. And when I run it, you wait a bit, and then you get a segmentation fault. Because what happens is that it overwrites some of the constructors in the class. Like, it doesn't actually remove the class from the class table. Like, it still exists. That you can't instantiate it. But the engine just assumes it can always throw in an error or an exception. And then when you try to do it, and it doesn't exist, it just completely breaks. I have a fix for this, which is just to remove the ini setting, because it does nothing useful. Like, if you want to the thing, it only works for internal classes, which are classes defined by an extension. Now, if you don't want an extension to work, you could just not load it. And every other like class that exists in the language, which is mandatory, is somewhat required for the engine to work. So yeah, like the only place I know this is actually used is when we are using the fuzzer to disable the infinite iterator class from SPL, so that the fuzzer doesn't become in an infinite loop and starts using memory forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So yeah, okay, functions. This one is also quite cool. So this is actually a very cool feature. I actually quite like this of PHP. So before 8.0, if you did disable function, what it would do is that it would still exist, but it would tell you that you can't actually run the function. But since 8.0, what happens is that it actually removes the function from the function table, which means is that you can redefine built-in functions with your own code. So now I can disable strlen, and I can create my own strlen function, and I can run it so that any string has length 42. And this is one thing which I love about PHP. Is this useful? Should you do this? Probably not. But if one PHP function is just buggy and you don't want it, or you just want to replace it, I guess you could do that. Okay, this is the last thing which I want to say, and then I think we'll take questions, except if you want me to give you more examples. So we're 90. So I think people should be quite familiar. Like, okay, I usually start this question: who has heard about strict types? Most people, I guess. So, but I feel like a lot of times people don't actually know how strict types actually works and what it does. So here the thing is like strict types. Currently, when I have disabled it, is that I pass in the string 10 to a function that expects an integer. It will just cast the string to an integer and work the way it is. So the function, actually the body of the function always has a value of the proper type. However, if you want it to be more strict, you can enable disable strict types, and then you get a type error being like, you have passed me a value of invalid types. I can't do anything with this. Here, have a type error. Now, this only works with scalar types, because scalar type juggling is the only thing you can do. You can't type juggle objects in PHP. However, the thing about strict types, which is unfortunate, which to a certain degree makes it a bit useless sometimes, is that strict types only corresponds to the scope of your file, and it only affects userland functions, which are called by userland code. And like any closure is actually defined by the behavior it has is not by its declaration site, but it's by its use site. So if you use array filter, which calls the function that you've defined under strict type mode, it actually uses weak typing, because the engine does everything under weak typing. So if you would have like a userland implementation of array filter and you would try to run this would break, because like the strict types wouldn't match up. However, by calling the engine, you basically completely bypass this. This is a bit of an oversight of strict types, is that probably while implementing it, closers should have taken the value of strict types into account from the scope it was declared, rather than from the call site. But also, like another thing is that strict type doesn't affect operators. So currently, like type juggling with operators works. Like I can do like a string 1 plus like another string, and it will just cast them to like numeric values, and then we'll add them together. I can also add this with a Boolean, and that like the Boolean will, like true will get cast to 1, and this way it will do that. Did I do another scope? Oh, right, yeah, okay. I think this is to also explain the scope thing, in that. So I will just have both. So this is the function that I've declared from the previous things, like foo, which takes an integer, and it var dumps this, and then I have a closure which is called fn, which also takes an integer and like just var dumps it. But considering to the calling scope, if I use strings, like this just works, because it's like, well, here I don't actually use strict types, so then the functions behave as if they were not strict types, even though you've declared them in your file with strict types. And similarly, if I flip this in that like I declare the functions in a file without strict types, and then I have the calling scope have strict types, and I run this again, you actually get type errors. So yeah. How much time do we have? 5 minutes? Does anybody want questions, or should I just continue giving more examples for like another 5 minutes? Okay, I'll just continue. This is usually what happens. It's like, I don't know why I even ask at this point anymore. It seems like you all just really like seeing how PHP is a bit weird. Oh, right. Oh, I forgot about this. Oh, this is brilliant. I do love this. So PHP has this very weird thing, which I have no idea why ever anybody decided this was a good idea, in that you can override class constants. So I can define my class constant foo, and then I can say it's from P, and then I can redeclare it in my child class to change the value of it. And yeah, and then like, yeah, it's like, well, from child C, I get like from C. Now the thing is like, the thing which is very infuriating about this is that you can just change the type of it. Like PHP doesn't care about like what the type of the constant is. So if you would expect that, like, well, you know, I'm expecting of like the class of like the constant of class P to be of a string, but then like your child decides to extend it to change it to an integer, that well, I can't do this. Which is why PHP is one of the only goddamn languages which has like a type declaration for constants, so that if I do this, and if I run this again, I get a fatal error in that the type of the constant must be compatible of the type with the parent parent constant, so that you can't just completely change the value of the type. So yeah, brilliant. And the other thing is that this is, I feel, is a thing like people should be quite aware of, because I feel everybody has used defined at least once in their life. But what it basically does is that it means that like, oh, I want just, like I'm defining just a constant at runtime, basically. So I can have my constant, I can have it random, and so that when I run it again, like the next time, it's just a different value, and then I can do it again, and it's a different value, and like, which is, you know, totally normal. But it's okay, you know, this is just like, you know, I only define it once, like it can be whatever it wants, but like the moment I have a constant and the moment it's defined, it is always the same, right? Right? You wouldn't like betray me, PHP, would you do this? Well, it does actually. So PHP, like the SID constant is mimics the session token that you get in the cookie, like the session cookie ID. And like, okay, you do need to use the weird ini setting, which you should not use, which is just, yeah, which is disabling to only use cookies, so that it can also pass as get parameters, which is a bit of a security problem, so probably don't do this anyway. But yeah, I can start my session, I can, well, save the ID, and then I can destroy it, and then I can start it again, and then I get a different session ID. Because apparently a constant doesn't need to be constant. So yeah, and I think I'm done. I don't think I have time for another set of examples. So I hope you enjoyed the about 45 minutes, 50 minutes of this.